Well, today is a really special webinar because we have a guest speaker with us, Mikl Brawner, who is the founder and co-owner of Harlequin's Gardens in Boulder, Colorado. And we also have one of our staff members here from our pesticide team, one of our pesticide specialists, Sharon Selvaggio.
Thanks so much, Rachel, for introducing me. And thank you so much, Mikl, for being here. I wanted to talk a little bit about this photo that we have here on the left. As you can see from this photo, this is a picture of Mikl, I think probably shortly after starting Harlequin Gardens Sustainable Nursery and Garden Center in Boulder, Colorado. And as you can see from the photo here, Mikl is a guy not much afraid of risk, maybe a little bit outside the box, strong, and probably a master of balance. And I think we'll probably touch on a number of those things today. So we'll learn more about Mikl Brawner and Harlequin Gardens as we go through this. But before we begin, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what we know about pesticides and nursery plants in general in this country, and what we can all do as consumers to get our gardens off to a good start by talking to nurseries about their practices. So first, I think we all know that pollinators need conservation action, and a big part of that is more habitat. So much habitat has been erased, turned into intensive farmland or housing. So habitat restoration is key, and luckily there's thousands of people like yourselves doing this work across the country. But we need to protect those restoration sites from pesticides. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recommends that insecticide-free plants be used in restoration and protected from contamination after planting. But this can be difficult because first, we already know that most commercial nurseries and greenhouses do use pesticides, including insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides on or near the plants that they produce. And there've been a few published studies on such plants to try to understand what kind of residues or pesticides are left in the plants. So from these studies, we know that typically there are lots of residues, lots of pesticides in or on the nursery plants, and typically multiple pesticides in a single sample of a leaf or a flower or pollen. And sometimes these residue loads reach levels that are actually high enough that they can kill bees. Especially for the most toxic insecticides. We know too that pesticides that are applied at the nursery potentially can expose adults or larvae directly if they happen to be visiting the nursery. And then there's a special category of pesticides known as systemics. These are pesticides that penetrate the plant and move through the plant, often moving to the leaves or the pollen or the nectar. And this means that residues can be available in the leaves or the pollen or the nectar later when bees or butterflies are feeding on these. One more concern that we have about systemic pesticides is that in woody plants, they seem to be particularly persistent. They may last for months or years after an application. So we knew that already from these broad studies that have been done. However, until recently, we didn't know about whether really important pollinator plants like milkweed also contain pesticide residue at the point of sale. We also didn't know much about how sensitive monarchs are to pesticides. So 2 years ago, Xerces teamed up with two University of Nevada researchers, Chris Halsch and Matt Forrester, and we collaborated to look into this question. We recruited staff and volunteers who purchased milkweed plants from 33 stores across 15 states back in 2020. And these were in stores that were generally along the monarch migratory pathways, as you can see from this map. A total of 235 different plants were purchased, and leaf samples were collected from each plant, and then these were sent to a lab for analysis. We also collected from a small subset of these plants data 2 weeks later, just to understand better how quickly pesticide residues declined in 2 weeks. What we found was that every milkweed plant that we'd purchased from a nursery was contaminated. So that was 235 different plants. And there were a total of 61 different pesticides detected overall, mostly insecticides and fungicides, but also some herbicides. So next, we wanted to know, what did this mean for monarchs? As you know, monarch caterpillars feed on milkweed, and we wanted to know, were any of these pesticides harmful to the caterpillars? Unfortunately, the literature on how pesticides affect monarchs is very slim. We have a lot of data on how pesticides affect honeybees and sometimes other bees, but in this case, after searching the scientific literature, we discovered that the toxic effects for 85% of the pesticides found have never been investigated for monarchs, at least when we looked at leaf residue. Only 9 of the 61 pesticides that we found have been tested on monarchs. So we also knew that there were about 12 pesticides per plant on average, and the number and the variety of these different chemicals and mixtures raised a question about whether these chemicals have the ability to interact, causing higher toxic effects to monarch caterpillars than if they were present alone. These kind of interactions have been seen in other studies. So we only had toxicity data for 9 pesticides, but even with this, we discovered that nearly 40% of the plants contained pesticides at levels considered toxic. And these toxic plants came from about half of the sampled locations, and they were mostly due to 2 fungicides, which occurred at concentrations shown by a previous study to result in smaller adult monarchs. Size, specifically wing length, has been correlated with migratory ability in monarchs. So finding fungicides in milkweeds at levels that reduces wing length definitely raised concern. And this isn't the first time that fungicides have been associated with negative effects on pollinators. Previous studies have found associations between fungicides and reduced larval survival, lower pupal weight, and a reduced adult longevity. Also, fungicides are known in certain combinations to inhibit the ability of insects to actually detoxify and process insecticides. So the study's findings really highlight the need to improve nursery practices to ensure that the plants being sold as pollinator friendly are also pollinator safe. This was a quote from my supervisor on May Code, shown up here. And the reason that this was one of the findings is that another thing that we found is that plants that actually contained a label about their value for wildlife were actually almost twice as likely to contain at least 1 pesticide at concerning levels. This was a huge reminder to us, and hopefully will be to you, that we need to go beyond marketing information. It doesn't give consumers a full picture. We recommend that consumers be aware and talk to their nurseries, not solely rely upon labels, because labels are generally unregulated in the United States. We also found insecticides at some pretty high levels, but without that baseline toxicity data for monarchs, we're really kind of unsure how to interpret that. If we were analyzing for bees, we'd be concerned, but we were looking at leaf tissue, and we're specifically looking at monarch caterpillar effects. Now, the last point, we did see that certain compounds like spinosad and acephate, which are 2 insecticides, they're both known to have short half-lives. In other words, they degrade fairly quickly. And we did see that within 2 weeks, there was a pretty strong reduction of those chemicals. Whereas those that are known to persist a little longer degrade more slowly, including azoxystrobin, which is one of the fungicides that we found of concern. That didn't really change over 2 weeks. So this is kind of another thing to consider when we look at residues. How long are they going to last on the plants after we bring them home and plant them? So seeing this data together with the earlier studies on nursery plants, it makes sense to ask, why are we finding pesticide residues in nursery plants? Why do so many nurseries use pesticides, even on plants known to have great value to bees and butterflies? And so to answer these questions, we at Xerces have been spending time examining the nursery industry and talking to a lot of growers. That's how I ultimately ended up meeting Mikl. But looking broadly at studies and some broad conclusions based upon some of the conversations we've had and studies that we've looked at, are that greenhouse conditions, which nurseries often use, are often conducive to pest outbreaks. And nursery growers as a group have a concern that sales might be affected if there's plant damage or presence of insects. And that kind of goes back to us and our expectations. Another point is that pesticides relative to other costs of production are cheap. When researchers have looked at sort of like the overall cost of production, pesticides average out to be 2% of a typical nursery grower's budget versus 26% of the budget for labor. There's also state and federal plant health regulations that often come into play for nurseries. So this sometimes forces some pesticide use. Another factor is that based on labels that the EPA publishes, nurseries can use much higher rates per plant for some pesticides than what EPA allows on food crops. So this can result in some of those higher residues as well. Finally, there's generally a kind of a lack of awareness from buyers and a difficulty of dialoguing, especially with growers directly. And there's really no labeling rules. We also only have reporting rules for pesticide use in California. However, we believe that there's solutions, and it's about addressing root causes, the chemical dependency of pest management in agriculture and nursery production in our country. So we want everybody to continue buying pollinator plants and planting pollinator plants. However, we also want people to, be aware of what these issues and consider those root causes and take steps to work on those, because every little bit that all of us can do really helps. So what do we think you can do? Well, first of all, your purchase requests can really transform practices. A conversation can make a difference. So if you buy, it's really important that you make clear to your nurseries to tell them, I want pollinator-safe plants. I want plants free of pesticides that could be harmful to bees, monarchs, and other pollinators. This is, a way to begin that conversation, and not just for consumers, but also for restorationists and landscapers and retailers too. All of us who buy plants, further down the chain can make a difference if we make clear what we want. But don't stop there. It's also really important to interpret what you mean by plants safe for pollinators. So we recommend that you seek out organic plants. And if they can't offer you certified organic, and we know that these can be really hard to find outside of vegetable starts, you can ask them if they have plants that have been grown without neonics and other similar systemic insecticides. Growers that have adopted neonic-free policies are showing that they want to do things right. But it is really important, based upon the findings that we've seen, that going neonic-free is on its own not necessarily enough. So if your nursery doesn't have neonic-free plants, or doesn't promise to find out for you, then we recommend you either go elsewhere, informing them that you are going elsewhere because of this importance of this to you. It may motivate them to adopt stronger practices. And in addition, because neonics are not the only issue, ask them about what steps their nursery and their suppliers take to offer plants grown using pollinator-friendly pest management. And I'll talk more about what that means on the next slide. So on this slide, I have this postcard shown about bee-safe plants. And although we designed it really focusing on bees, this same guidance can help you find plants safe for monarchs and other pollinators too. Now, we promote and strongly believe in vetting the nurseries that you use by investigating to what extent they practice pollinator-friendly plant production. And when we pare this concept down to the basics, the framework for producing pollinator-friendly production plants is really about three things: prevention of pests and diseases using non-chemical management techniques, monitoring pest pressure so that pesticides are not applied before pressure or damage is evident, and limiting pesticide harm by avoiding known toxic pesticides and being careful about how and when those pesticides are applied if they're used. Now, as an organization at Xerces, we're committed to having advanced interviews with all of the nurseries that we work with, whether we engage in a contract grow or we just buy plants off the shelf. And this advanced vetting that we do allows us to get to know those practices of each nursery. Every nursery is different. Every nursery has a different combination of some of these things. But understanding more deeply kind of how nurseries put these principles into practice is really helpful. But how do you do that? So I'm showing here 2 fact sheets that we have on our website, Buying Bee Safe Plants, which is really for sort of consumers, especially those that are looking for plants for their home garden, or landscape designers will also find this really useful. And the second is for nurseries, including retail nurseries. It's also is good for everyone to look at, but it's particularly valuable for producers and for larger buyers. And both of these are available, like I said, on the Xerces website. Now, I've been putting out this message for about 2 years, and I just want to say that in that time, I've received some feedback from a number of people who have taken these questions and gone out there, and sometimes frustration from some of our, strong advocates out there about how difficult it is to actually have these conversations. And I recognize that, having done this myself. So I wanted to highlight that we have also put out some videos on our social media. There's a series of reels or little videos that kind of help go to a deeper level on some of this. And so this just shows a screenshot from one that got posted this week that helps you interpret and respond to different answers when you kind of get back a response from a retail nursery about the practices. So we know that this is not always the easiest thing to do, and we know that you need to be dedicated to do this. But anyway, so we hope that these nursery rules will be helpful to you. Okay, we are arriving now at the fun part of the webinar. Mikl and I are going to chat. And Mikl, are you ready? And unmuted? Okay, awesome. Thank you again for being here. It's great to have an experienced nursery grower and retailer here to talk with us. So we're going to kind of run this almost like a little this is not going to follow a normal kind of like interview that I would do if I was cold calling a nursery, because I've talked to Mikl several times, and this is really more about Mikl and his overall philosophy at Harlequin's Gardens. So this photo, Mikl, you started Harlequin's Nursery 31 years ago, and you and your wife, Eve, shown here, run the nursery together. And at Harlequin's, you offer organic veggies, neonic-free flowering plants, a great selection of native and water-wise plants, and perennials and fruit plants. And you grow a lot, but not all of the plants that you sell. So I remember you telling me a bit about your travel days when you were younger, and that photo that we showed of you at the very beginning, balancing on one leg on the ridge line of your half-built greenhouse, shows that you were certainly a gutsy kind of fellow. So tell me a bit about what led you into the nursery business. What experience did you bring, and what principles of philosophy were you motivated by from the start?
Well, I always loved nature and spent a lot of time in the woods growing up, and loved gardening. And I started out trying to make a living as an arborist. And so I spent a lot of years of my life, hours a day in trees. And but that at some point, it became obvious that I wasn't going to be able to climb trees forever. And so I started thinking, well, what else might I do? And I had bought this 2-acre property, and I had found out that it was a use by right to have a nursery there. And I really liked the idea of operating a nursery and growing plants for a living. So launched into it, and it looked kind of daunting. There was no dependable source of water. We were down at the end of a dead-end road, And the only infrastructure there was this rundown house and with 7 junk cars around the outside. So basically had to build up the nursery from scratch and finance it with my tree care business. So that's how we got started. But thank goodness, I now have my wife Eve to help me, who is also a plant lover and was trained as a landscape architect and has helped the nursery enormously and is participating a lot in the operation of the nursery now. So when I first started, I had actually never even worked at a nursery before, but you know, how hard could it be? Well, it's hard, and I had a lot to learn. And fortunately, there's a lot of wonderful people in Colorado who do know a lot about plants, and I learned a lot from them. But one of the things I didn't learn was I didn't learn a lot of bad habits, like that you have to use pesticides. And so starting from scratch was, in a sense, sort of somewhat helpful because I could start from my own principles. I'd already tried to operate an organic orchard in Iowa before I moved to Colorado. And so I was already exploring the organic approach to things and already had decided that poisons wasn't the way I wanted to go. So one of the things, just one of the things I might say is that the very fact that we have been focusing on an ecological approach and a dedication to native plants and an organic approach has actually helped us to become known. We're down at the end of this dead end road, and it's not easy to find us. And yet people are coming from South Denver, even Colorado Springs, far away, because of the ecological approach that we take.
It's great to hear. Well, thank you. I'm going to move to this beautiful photo of a xeriscape pollinated garden at Harlequin's. And, you know, I think as all of us are aware, pollinator health has spotlighted pest management in agriculture and including the nursery trade as well. And more consumers are seeking out plants free of toxic pesticides, specifically for pollinators. And in our conversations, you have, you know, told me what you do for pest management, and you're very strict about the pest management practices you abide by. So what are your sideboards and what are the reasons that you take this approach?
Well, if you look at the realm in a very sort of simple-minded and common sense way, it's pretty obvious that the idea of poisoning our environment and ourselves is not a good idea. It seems pretty obvious to everybody, really. Even I are both quite conscious of our own health, and we're also quite in tune and in touch with our community and with nature. And so why would we want to poison our community and nature? It's not, it seems obvious that's not a good idea. So 8 years ago, when we first learned about the toxicity of neonicotinoids and about the fact that these pollinator plants were being sprayed with neonicotinoids that will attract the pollinators and then poison them and weaken them, we just said no. Eve and I both were very clear about that. And so we called up our suppliers and asked everybody if they were, if they were using neonicotinoids, and the people that said yes, they were, we said, okay, sorry, we can't do business with you anymore. We told them. We wanted them to know in case they could possibly change. And some of them have in the meanwhile. We bought the 1 acre property next to us, went into debt to do that, so that we could grow our own neonic-free and pesticide-free, completely pesticide-free, toxic pesticide-free plants, which was pretty challenging. for a small company like us. But when the neonicotinoids last 3 months to 5 years and do this much damage to it's not just pollinators, all insects really, it became obvious that that was the right thing to do. And so ever since we turned in that direction, methods and approaches have been showing up, appearing, and we've been discovering. Of course, I research constantly to find ways of operating our nursery without using all this stuff. So and amazingly, this year, Colorado has passed a law outlawing neonics on to be sold in retail stores. So everybody should take heart with this and encourage your own states to do the same thing.
That's great to hear. And it's heartening to hear about how all these pieces are linked together, you know, like the kind of broad attention that came to this issue, especially after the Wilsonville bee kill a few years ago, 8 years ago. And then, you know, how you were paying attention out there in Colorado and what's happening with legislation this year. It's really interesting. I want to show this picture, which Michael and his staff showed with me. And when I have conversations with nurseries and I ask them about pesticides, I usually ask about like the most toxic pesticides and whether they use that. Very infrequently, I mean, I think this is the first time someone's actually taken a picture of the shelf and sent it to me. And so I took a look at this, and what I noticed is that everything on this shelf is OMRI listed in either botanical oil or repellent. What OMRI listed means, this is the photo that shows what they sell or use at the nursery. And it may look like a lot, but when you realize that it's OMRI listed and either botanicals or oils, what you notice is that basically these are organically approved pesticides. And so Michael is and his staff are essentially growing organically without being certified organic. And that is something that we try to support. We would love it if we had, you know, the ability to convince nursery owners across the board to go completely pesticide free, but that we don't really feel like that's a realistic goal at this point. So using only pesticides within this broader framework of prevention as a last resort, and that have very limited persistence, like most pesticides that are organically available do, we feel is a really good approach. If you don't know what OMRI means, OMRI is the Organic Materials Review Institute, and they basically certify products for use within the organic sector. So again, just going back to our recommendation, we do recommend that people ask their nurseries if they have organically grown plants, and we know that it's not easy to find. A big reason is because of the difficulty of growing without chemical fertilizers. But you know, like I said, basically organic pesticides, although they may have some toxicity, some of them do for sure, and some of them are of concern to pollinators, but they generally break down quickly. So we see these as lower risk. So with that, let's go to a deeper point. You are able to avoid using synthetic and long-lasting pesticides because you've refined your growing practices so that your plants stay healthy and start healthy. And in our past conversations, Michael, you've talked about your soil management practices and the importance that soil has for growing healthy plants that can resist insect and disease pressure. So help us understand the soil relationships with plant health and how you provide your plants with the best soil at your nursery.
Well, this is not just my idea. This is a pretty well-established idea in organic agriculture, which is interestingly actually ahead of the nursery industry. There's plenty of organic vegetable growers and other growers of other crops that understand these principles. In fact, Acres USA magazine is a great source for people to learn more of scale, not just in 1 or 2 acre vegetable farms. But so the basic principles are that a healthy soil leads to healthy plants, leads to healthy people. And this is very straightforward and proven. So the idea that I learned in my research about alternatives to pesticides many years ago was that when plants are strong and healthy, they attract very few pests. They're naturally defensive. So it comes from the basic reality that plants have been dealing with for thousands of years, which is that plants are rooted to the ground and can't run away from their pests. So they defend themselves chemically. And they can't really manufacture these chemical defenses if the only thing that they have to grow on is soilless mixes and chemical fertilizers. Soilless mixes don't have life, and in nature, the soil life is the digestive system of the plant world, and by digesting the nutrients and the materials in the soil, those materials then become plant available. Otherwise, otherwise they're not. And the chemical fertilizers, although they might provide nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, they do not provide the micronutrients which are essential for a plant building their own immune system. So this is one of the catch-22s. You grow things in these soilless mixes with chemical fertilizers, and then you get a lot of bug problems because the plants can't defend themselves. So what we do is I've been making my own soil mixes for 30 years, and of course I use ingredients that I buy from other places and mix things together. But overall approach is that we're trying to get life into the soil. So we use real stuff. You put compost in our soil mixes, and we even do inoculate with mycorrhizae, and we use some manure fertilizers, and we buy some products, biological products, from certain companies that are getting to be more and more companies now that are realizing that there's a market for people like me and organic vegetable growers who want to support the health of their plants. And so by spending much more money than most nurseries spend on our potting mixes, we spend far less money on pest management, and with far less time, far less trouble. We do have some pest problems, and then if we do have pest problems, then we deal with them with non-toxic materials, which we teach our customers how to use. But by providing soils that are alive and that have these raw materials in them that plants can use to make themselves strong and to make their own phytochemicals to defend themselves, we're actually asking our plants to work harder, to take the nutrients with the help of these, with soil biology, take the nutrients from the soil, and this helps to make the plants actually stronger and more self-sufficient.
Yeah, I love this concept. I remember, I don't know if you know Jessica Wallace. She's a garden writer and an entomologist as well up in the Northeast. And I first read about HIPVs basically plant volatile chemicals that plants release that help also draw in predatory insects to start to work on herbivorous insects that might be starting to chew up. And just this whole concept of plant chemical defense and communication is just absolutely fascinating and kind of an emerging area of science. And so it's really great to hear how you're talking about how the soil helps support that. Plants in the naturally evolved systems of self-defense and communication. So you mentioned this briefly, but can you go into a little bit of detail? You source some of your plants from others, and when we recommend to people that when they're trying to find plants free of some of the most toxic pesticides, that they ask the retailers how they are, vetting their own growers, that their suppliers, and they often discover that retailers don't really know the practices of those suppliers, at least with regard to pest management. But so tell us a bit about Harlequin's approach to learning about your suppliers.
Well, first of all, I want to say that this photo is of our propagator. When we bought the 1 acre next to us, the only way that we could afford to buy this property was by starting a wholesale business that would both supply us with our pesticide-free plants and also provide an income to help pay the mortgage and all the expenses of building a nursery from scratch. And so one of the essential components of that is to have somebody who really knows how to propagate plants. And obviously I can't do all of that. And even I used to do that. We were the first propagators. But so there was a plant nursery in Denver that was going out of business, and we were familiar with this nursery. We'd been doing business with them, and the head propagator there, I knew, had some experience with growing plants without pesticides. So I contacted him and said, would you like to come work for us? And of course, we couldn't pay him as much as he had been being paid, but he didn't want to keep growing with pesticides. Now, this is Gary Mice, and he's been managing and propagating for our wholesale nursery now for 8 years and doing a great job. And so he and I are completely in agreement about not using all of these chemicals that a lot of nurseries use. So he's a brave man, and really appreciate his help. So as far as getting plants from other nurseries, the first thing we do is we call them and ask them if they use neonicotinoids or any systemic pesticides. And if they say yes, then we say, sorry, we can't do business with you then, goodbye. And if they say no, then we say, great, that's wonderful. What about your suppliers? You're getting cuttings and liners and plugs from other nurseries. Are they using neonicotinoids? And if they say, oh, we have no idea, then we say, well, then is there any way in which we can buy plants that you've grown without neonicotinoids and know which ones that you've been getting from nurseries that are using neonicotinoids? Because these things last 3 months to 5 years, and we're not going to buy those kind of plants if your suppliers have been using them. And some of them say, oh, we have no idea, we can't do that. We say, sorry, we can't deal with you. Some of them will say, well, yes, here's a list of the plants that we propagate, and they are not neonicotinoids. Say, okay, we'll buy those then. And sometimes we'll say, they'll say, well, we do use neonicotinoids, but we don't use them until we have to start sending them out of state, which happens in the middle of June. And say, okay, then send us your plant list. We'll buy from you until the middle of June, and then we won't. So that allows us to be able to purchase from other companies and make sure that all of our plants are neonic free. And if we talk to somebody and they act like they're not really sure, then we ask that we get to talk to the propagators. the people who are actually applying the pest management products, because a lot of times the salespeople will go, "Oh no, this is fine. Oh, it's perfectly fine. There's no problems here." And we go, "Well, this doesn't sound sincere, you know. So I want to talk to your propagator." So we try to really get to the bottom of it, and this takes a lot of work and takes time, and it's troublesome, and we don't always get people who are appreciative of those kind of questions. You know, and I've had people say, "Yeah, we don't really care whether we are using neonics or not, but the customers are just demanding it, and so we have to do it. So yeah, we don't use it." But so whatever the reasons are, we're glad to hear that they're not using them. So that's our basic approach, and we grow thousands of plants ourselves that are pesticide free, that are toxic pesticide free.
I really appreciate you going through that and illustrating your persistence, trying to get to the bottom of it. And it does take dedication and persistence and some work. And we really appreciate you doing that. And then this is a lesson that we hope that other nurseries and retailers especially will take from this, as well as the consumers out there. That it takes a little bit of work, but it's worth it.
By the way, I do want to say one more thing about this slide.
I'm sorry, I was advancing while I was talking, and so let's go back. Yeah.
So we have over 20 people working for us, and they are thrilled that we're not using pesticides on site, that they can touch any plant that we have produced and know that it's pesticide free. That's you know, it's not easy to get people to work, and especially not for nursery prices, because we're not making big money. But the fact that we are growing our plants without pesticides is very attractive to people who work for us.
Yeah, I imagine. I've definitely talked to people who work with farm workers and specifically nursery staff. And there are some significant health issues that sometimes these kinds of occupations really present. And it's of significant concern to some organizations who are really trying to help. So I imagine, yeah, that your employees are happy that they don't have to deal with yet another, you know, health threat. Thank you for that. So I know we've only had a chance to touch the tip of the iceberg in terms of your knowledge and experience and everything that you have been doing, but can you share other aspects about your growing practices that we haven't touched on? And I'm also interested in your overall focus on sustainability.
Well, yeah, it's in nature, everything's related, and in a nursery business, it's every part of it, from how we select our plants that we grow. We live in Colorado, so we select our plants to be specifically adapted to Colorado conditions. There are a lot of good plants that are promoted in national publications and whatnot that are beautiful and whatnot, and we won't sell them because they need acidic soil, or they really want a significant amount of water, or they're vulnerable to other conditions, drying winds and cold, quick temperature changes and various other things that we have here in Colorado. So we really are very specific about choosing our plants that are well adapted. And by doing that, we're not fighting a lot of problems that we would otherwise be meeting. There's no sense in spraying pesticides on something that are not, you know, that have frequent pest problems here. So there are plenty of other good plants, so we don't need to carry everything. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing is that from the very beginning, we have been focusing on energy efficiency in our greenhouses. And this little greenhouse here on the right was the same one that I was balancing on in the very beginning slide. That is 4 feet down in the ground, and I had spent 2 years investigating and designing a greenhouse that could be grown without fossil fuels, and this greenhouse does. We can grow tomatoes down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit without a heater at all. This was our first greenhouse, and we propagated thousands and thousands of plants. And then as soon as they got big enough, we would move them out to less controlled environment where they would toughen up. But a lot of the greenhouses that we have built have been built with energy conservation in mind. We first of all don't want to spend a lot of money on propane. You know, we spend a lot of money on labor. We like spending a lot of money on labor. We'd much rather spend money on labor than on pesticides and propane or natural gas. So every time that I've built a greenhouse, I've tried to design it the best I could, and I've got several greenhouses now that are 10 degrees warmer at night than a standard hoop house. So that's huge in terms of both energy savings, pollution, and cost. So we also compost, we recycle, we reuse pots, we take we bag up a lot of soil products that we can't buy as a bagged product, and we bag it ourselves, and we spend labor to do that, and we put them in a tough bag that then we charge people $1 for, and they get that $1 back when they bring the bag back. And you think, oh, that's a nuisance, people aren't going to want that. Wrong, people prefer that. A lot of people do, and will happy to bring those bags back and get their $1 back and not see that plastic bag go to the landfill. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is the educational part of the process, because it's one thing for us to be neonic free, and for us to be doing all of these things to support the environment, but our customers really want to be better informed and have better capacity themselves to be more ecological. And so we teach lots of classes. I teach classes myself, you know, in non-toxic pest management and in berry bushes and fruit trees and pruning. Of course, I'm an excellent pruner. And so if people know how, and we have other people also who are from the community who are experts in vegetable gardening and mushroom growing and garden design and whatnot. And so we bring them in to teach also, and our classes are mostly an hour and a half long. Oh no, people wouldn't stay for an hour and a half. Yeah, people stay and they don't want to leave. They're learning something that they can use. That's worth their while to be there. And so, and my wife is very important. It was her vision, you know, 20 years ago, that we would be much more developed in the educational aspect of our nursery. And so she's put a lot of energy into that. And these days she's writing a lot of our e-newsletters, doing most of the writing for our e-newsletters, and putting those together in such a way that it's very interesting and colorful with another person on our staff, so that people will come to learn and you know, help themselves to be better and more successful gardeners.
That's great. And on you comment about people staying for an hour and a half, I'm gonna ask you one last question, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. And we may spill over a little bit. I certainly hope that people can stay on and ask questions if you like. We might go over the hour, but if you can't, come back and watch it on our YouTube channel later, and feel free to contact Mikl with additional questions or myself. But so Mikl, the last question that I had for you is touching on your education that you do there. What are you most passionate about teaching? And I guess another way of putting it is, what are the most important lessons that you've learned along the way? And what do you most want people to learn from you?
I think one of the most important lessons that I can share with people and with other nurseries is that we don't need to use petroleum to grow plants. We don't need to use poisons to have pest management. We don't really, I don't think we need fossil fuels to heat greenhouses. We've done a tremendous job, with our limited amount of money and manpower and whatnot to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use. But, I think one of the important things that kind of goes along with non-toxic pest management is for people to understand themselves that they have to accept a certain level of predation from insects. We share our world with insects, and was one nurseryman used to say, if you're not seeing holes in your leaves, you're not feeding the birds. And to say it in a different way, if you are too impatient that you want to spray insects the first moment that you see a pest, then you're going to be killing off the beneficial insects, which could very well be taking care of those pests without you even seeing them. If you let them have the food. See, whenever we take care of pests, I don't try to get rid of 100% of them, not at all. I want to leave at least 10 to 20% of the pests. And oh, good, you'll take them home and they'll feed your ladybugs and lacewings and syrphid flies. I know that sounds like a con, but that's actually true. And so when we let our plants be eaten a little bit, that actually makes them stronger, because plants don't start to produce these phytochemicals until they're challenged. Then that tells them, now I've got to start producing all these phytonutrients, these phytochemicals, in order to defend them. And then they share that information with their fellow plants through their roots and also through these volatiles in the air. So these are some of the important points that I would like to share with people. And just overall, the idea that we know so little about our microbial world. It's really only been in the last 20, maybe even 10 years that we're really starting to get to know our microbiology in our soil life. And so there's millions of creatures we don't even know what they are or what they do. And we have this tremendous potential, I think equal to the potential of petroleum petroleum has had in our world and in our economy, tremendous potential for partnering with nature and partnering with this microbial world that could have tremendous capacity to help us with pest management, with nutrition, with health, all of these different things. So overall, the approach should be supporting life, not killing life. And that supporting life will really help us to help our own health and help us to regenerate the planet.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mikl. That was great. And before we move into questions, I just want to say thanks to all of the Xerces Society supporters, and especially to the Reynolds family and Carol Petrie Foundation for funding Xerces' work in this area. And we are a donor-supported nonprofit. And if you'd like to become a member, you can go to that link and become a member today. So I'm sure that there's lots of questions, and we're probably going to spill over a little bit, but I'll pass it over to to Rachel and Carly to moderate the question and answer. And here we go.
All right. Thank you so much for that enlightening discussion, Sharon and Michael. It's always wonderful to hear about real world examples of the Xerces mission in action. So we really appreciate that. I do have just a couple of questions in the queue here. And the first one is for Michael from Scott. So Scott is wondering, do you find that customers will pay a premium for pesticide-free or organic plants? Is this a business model that other nurseries can make successful in other markets?
Well, we don't charge a premium for our organic plants or for our pesticide-free plants or neonic-free plants. And we do that for two reasons. One is that we don't want to make ourselves such a boutique nursery that only the wealthy can afford to shop with us. And the other reason is that we think we can save money by not using pesticides and by not using fossil fuels that can make us a more efficient operation. So, you know, it may be possible for some nurseries who want to do that to be able to charge more, but we don't.
All right, thank you so much. And this next one, I think you touched on a little bit in your last response, but if you just want to expand at all, Sally is wondering, how do you handle pests on your nursery, fungus, insect, herbivores, and others?
That's about a 1 hour answer, and that would be a short answer. So really it starts with soil. If the soil is healthy and the plants are healthy, then they're going to have few pest problems, and that's the basic. And then if they start having, if there's a more than 10 to 20% damage being done on the plants, or sometimes there's certain insects that ravage a plant and go very rapidly, very fast damage, then you have to do something. Then we use non-toxic methods. And so on our last e-newsletter at harlequinsgardens.com, we talked about some simple approach to do that. And as you might have seen from one of those slides, one of the things we do is we offer a lot of non-toxic products for people to be able to use themselves. And so there's things like oils and insecticidal soaps that are non-toxic. Oils act by suffocation, the soaps act by desiccation. Then there's stuff like neem that is both a repellent and also that it interferes with insects moving from one life stage to another. Then there's other repellents, just like garlic and you know, plants. One of the phytochemicals that plants use to defend themselves are essential oils. I mean, essential oils are how we access those phytochemicals. And so Gary, our propagator, and I will use essential oils in our regular sprays. So, and that helps to make things stronger. One time Gary was using a stinging nettle in one of his sprays. And I said, Gary, what good does that stinging nettle do in the pest management? And he said, oh, it bothers them. So that's a great answer. You don't have to kill something if you can bother it and make it go away, or just make it less attractive. So, and that's the same thing with neem. Neem is one of the most powerful uses of neem is as an anti-feedant. So an insect come to it, takes a taste and goes, ew, that's good enough. You know, don't have to kill them. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And like I said, it really starts, and then tolerance. That's another part of the whole view. You know, if we can't tolerate even a little nibbling, we're lost. You know, it's not a big deal. As long as it's not really hurting the plant, we should allow a little bit of nibbling.
Lots of solutions there, Michael. Thank you. I really appreciate it. This next one I think could be for either Sharon or Michael, from Donna. She says, I often see comments in Facebook groups from people who use organic pesticides and don't realize that some of those are toxic to pollinators. I always provide the link to the Xerces article and chart on organic pesticides so they can see which of them have negative impacts on pollinators. While the most important thing to ask vendors is whether they use neonics or other systemic pesticides, do you recommend also asking them what organic pesticides they use on their plants? For example, neem oil, diatomaceous earth, BT.
I can go ahead and start on that anyway. Well, while I wouldn't discourage anyone from asking any question that they want, I don't necessarily think that that's the most important question to add. I think the most important question is about the prevention practices and monitoring the thresholds, as Michael alluded to. He said he's got like a 10 to 20% threshold. And before taking action with some kind of organic pesticide. But when we think about pesticides as a whole, there's like, I think over 1,000 different active ingredients, or basically different kinds of chemicals that are used in agriculture as a whole. The nursery sector has a subset of that. Maybe they've got like 250 or something available. I haven't done the math, but it's a subset. It's a lot of chemicals. And so most of those are synthetic. Some of those are organic, or basically come from natural materials like the essential oils and things like that. But it's true that some organic pesticides, like say spinosad, can be fairly toxic. They also break down pretty quickly. And we wouldn't want to encourage people to use them willy-nilly. We don't encourage anyone to use any pesticide without first having done everything that they can to try to prevent the problem in the first place and provide healthy growing conditions that make the plant more resistant, as Michael described, as sort of the core of his philosophy. And having a threshold before pesticides are used is really important. It's really common in agriculture for extension services to publish thresholds for particular pests. Pretty uncommon in the nursery business to have anything like that. And I haven't actually encountered many growers who have even an internal threshold. So I think it's more important to ask about those things, but certainly if you want to ask about any other kind of pesticide, go ahead, feel free to use whatever resources you need. It's the more information you have, the more comfortable you're going to be, and the better relationship that you're probably going to develop with that nursery as the dialogue continues.
And what I would add to that is that there are pesticides which are accepted by in OMRI certification that we won't use. We won't use pyrethrum, but the pyrethrum flowers will photodegrade in a few hours in sunlight, and so you almost never see that. What you see are the synthetic pyrethrums, the pyrethrins and the pyrethroids, which often are formulated with a synergist that sometimes is more toxic than the active ingredient, than the pyrethrum. And so we neither use nor sell pyrethroids or pyrethrins, and we're not using or selling spinosades because they are toxic to insects. And people say, well, if you just use it at the right time, then it's fine. But then you're depending on the customer to understand that, and then you have to be kind of work around that. And so we don't use that, or there's all sorts of Ryannia and various other kinds of botanicals that are actually toxic, and we're not interested in using those. I don't think we need to.